Welcome to Kokoro Conversations. My name is Alex Lang.
And I'm Rebekah Anderson.
And every week we come together and we have conversations about aspects of life that we feel are universal to the human experience. And the idea is, through these conversations, that we want to talk about how we can live more intentionally with ourselves and with our communities. And so today we're going to be talking about something that I think all of us have experienced, and I think all of us have engaged in on some level, which is this idea of cruelty, which may sound like an odd thing to talk about, but I think it's something that we don't often speak about, which is endemic to the human condition.
Right.
And I think it's important to tease it out because that part of yourself that is cruel, at least in my opinion, is something that if you don't understand where that comes from, it's hard to understand your actions in other parts of your life. So that's essentially why we're going to be talking about it today. And I want to begin by asking you kind of a fundamental question, which is, how do you define cruelty? So if you were going to take it, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to ask because what comes to mind is I feel like it's an ambivalence or like just not caring at all about someone's pain and suffering or enjoying the pain and suffering of others. Actions that cause harm and you either don't care or you actually enjoy that it causes harm.
Yeah, there's cruelty, I think, has a little sense of intentionality behind it.
Yes.
It's not just, oh, you got hurt.
Right.
It was, oh, you got hurt. And the enjoyment that comes out of it is an intentionality that maybe you caused it or you understood that what happened was something that was going to hurt the other person.
Right. Well, I think what's interesting too is that as I was going through and thinking about cruel moments that I've been part of because I inflicted them or that I've seen or heard about. And one of the interesting pieces was I think sometimes I didn't realize something was as cruel as it was until I saw the way it impacted another person. But sometimes I was just intending to like rub a person the wrong way or kind of poke them a little bit. And then I saw that it really hurt somebody. And I was like, oh my God. And so I think that certain things we can find that they were cruel afterwards. But real cruelty, I think it involves that intentionality.
Yeah, so I guess that brings to mind something interesting. I think we'll tease out more of that definition as we go.
Yeah.
Which is, I think in all of our lives, we've seen and witnessed in real time cruel moments.
Right.
And so I'm interested to know, what is something that is either happened to you personally, or something that you've witnessed where you thought to yourself, oh my God, that was an absolutely cruel and uncalled for moment.
Can I tell you about something that didn't happen to me and that I didn't even witness, but that somebody told me about that has like stuck with me for
That
years?
is off limits. You can't really talk about that on this. So that's like second and third hand information. What are we going to do?
I know. I mean, who can verify this information? It's word of mouth.
Okay, no,
So.
go ahead.
A couple of years ago, my mom told me a story about something she went through as a child that was like, it was one of the most unimaginable, cruel acts I'd ever heard about. And it was because it involved her and her siblings as children, and it involved a creature that had no say in the situation. So she told me that when she and her many siblings were younger, they found this stray cat. And they brought it home and they wanted to take care of it. They lived in a bar. And my mom's stepdad, he was really like, no, we can't have this cat. And so he put it in a plastic bag, beat it, and threw it in a river.
Oh my God.
And it was just like, it makes me sick to think about because it's just this creature that, is totally defenseless. And it was this way of telling these kids, like, don't you be doing this. Don't bring this home. And I could tell, my mom is she's in her 60s now. And it was like watching her tell that story was like it was happening all over again. And I could see that act of cruelty she witnessed. I can't remember. I want to say she told me she was like 12 when it happened. But she felt like a responsible adult for all these younger kids. She felt like she had to keep it all together. And watching her retell it, it was like it happened yesterday. It was just, I guess she wasn't emotional or anything, but I could tell it just like, it was a gut
deep.
punch.
It was deep.
Yeah, just one of the worst things I've heard of just like truly cruel.
Yeah, well, and I think that's, you're hitting on something about cruelty that I think is very important in this conversation, which is that cruelty, people can be mean.
Yeah.
And people can hurt you by saying mean things.
Right.
But I do believe when somebody is mean, oftentimes you can brush it off.
The stakes are not very high.
It might stick with you for a day or two and you move on.
Yeah.
Cruelty stays with you.
Yeah.
It's something deep inside.
Well, and to go back to another conversation we had, it's not just like triggering something. It is like, it's traumatic to experience certain forms of cruelty. Mm-hmm. Like it really disrupts who you are inside in some ways, or undermines it. Especially if you think on some level that you deserve it, which sadly, like when that happens to a person who's so young, I think that that's one of the messages that comes out of it. Well, I deserved that because of something beyond my control. And I say beyond my control because when you're a child, it really is beyond your control, but adults don't necessarily tell you that, particularly if they're the person who's causing the cruelty in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up something interesting about it, which is that often there's a power dynamic at play. Yeah. And oftentimes, I think the goal of cruelty, if we're talking about why somebody is absolutely cruel, it is to instill some deeper sense of your lack of self-worth. That person wants you to feel not only hurt and pain, but also they want you to feel a deep sense that you don't have autonomy over your life and that there are forces outside of you that can shape and shift your life in ways that you can't control.
Right. And we're talking so much about living with intentionality. And I know that for me, one of the greatest obstacles to living an intentional life were these moments where I felt that I had no control over my life, possibly in some cases because of cruelty that had been inflicted on me that made me feel that I was powerless. And I think you're right to say it's a power dynamic of somebody establishing power over someone else. But beyond that, typically a person inflicts cruelty on someone else when they feel powerless. And it's like the ultimate power trip. I'm going to do something so awful, so beyond the realm of what most people are willing to do, or that you would be able to do, because people can make it so that it seems like your sensitivity and kindness is a bad thing in those situations. I'm going to do something that's like the ultimate table flip of there's no way you're going to trump this act of cruelty and power.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think our desire to, as human beings, to be cruel comes from a lot of different places. But I think a sense of powerlessness on the part of the person who's inflicting it is very much in place, which brings me to kind of the one that I've witnessed. Now, I've been subject to many cruel behaviors, but probably one of the things that I witnessed in my life that was probably one of the cruelest things that I ever saw. And it was just a brief moment. I remember I was walking into a restaurant and I was walking through a parking lot. It's actually in Harrisburg. And as I was walking in, there was a father and his daughter was walking behind him. And she's probably, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that. And she's crying. And she goes, I want to see my mom. And he just says, as he's walking, he's like, he's walking fast. She's trying to keep up. And he says, yeah, well, she doesn't want to see you. And so it's kind of like that moment. I was like, oh my God. And it's something that he just said because clearly he's upset. Clearly he feels whatever's happening in this relationship. I mean, that tells you that something's not going well right there. And that that basically he's with his daughter and she's pining for her mother. And he wants to sit there and say, I'm the one taking care of you. She doesn't want to see you anymore. But you think about the dagger in a little girl's heart to hear that. Like when the way he said it too, it wasn't just like, oh, let's talk about this. Yeah. And let me tell you about his back is her, and he just says it flippantly like that, and just in the tone was so cruel, and that to me, I watched that and I thought, oh my God, and that was in just me walking into a restaurant, and that was something, and I imagine that's stuff that this little girl probably heard her whole life. Yes. But things like that stuck with me in way. I mean, it's crazy. That was literally probably 5 seconds in time, but that has stuck with me for so long. And I think about that as the things that have been done to me, the painful things that have been done in terms of inflicting physical harm or psychological harm, all those things. And in some ways, I would say what I witnessed with that little girl, that was far worse than anything I've ever been through. Because at least fundamentally, I understood that on some level I was loved. And I think that when even in spite of the behaviors that spoke to the contrary, but nobody ever came out and said that in that way to me. So I would say that was something that to me was, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that. And it might sound, I'm sure people can think of other cruel things that have happened to him, but to me, just that moment, the way it was said, how it was said, her age, all of those power dynamics, I was like, that was yes. It. When I was thinking of that question, that's what came to mind.
Well, and I have to say that you've helped me to recognize, too, another component of our definition of cruelty, which is, I think cruelty at its core tends to come from some experience of lovelessness. And so in that case, this father is probably going through something where he's experiencing his own lovelessness. And then he basically passes this message down to a child that's like foundational, that your mom doesn't want to see you. That's like the ultimate lovelessness. And it reminded me that over the summer, I met this little boy who was maybe 8 years old. I met him briefly. I was on a mission trip and we were staying in the church where he went to church during the week and just staying there throughout the week that we were away. And I just remember he told me a similar story. He said that his dad didn't want to see him, and I felt in every word that he thought it was his fault. Mm-hmm. And, he tells this random lady, me, he just told me in that moment, and I could tell he just needed somebody to hear that he felt like it was his fault. And to me, it was like the greatest gift, maybe of all of last year, that I was able to just look at in his eyes and say, it was not your fault. It was not your fault at all. And I know what you mean, where you say it's like this short moment that changes. That to me was like one of the most meaningful and heartbreaking moments of my year, I would say, was that little boy.
Yes, and I think that it's an interesting question, which is that I have to, in a sense, dehumanize who you are. And I say that because I think that some aspect of cruelty, no matter whether it's physical or spoken. Physical, you really have to do it real time, because if you're going to physically hurt somebody, you kind of have to believe that they're less than human, because if you believe they're equal to you, you can't do it. But cruelty, when it comes to words, the entire point is to dehumanize someone. So if I go back to that example of the young little girl who's walking behind her dad, I think in his mind, he's not thinking about how it's going to impact his daughter so much as he's trying to dehumanize his wife in his daughter's eyes. I think that's probably what he's going for in a way, because he's thinking, well, she doesn't want anything to do with us, so you should not hold her up on this pedestal, right? So he's knocking her down. But he's not realizing that in doing that, he's also crushing an aspect of who she is as a human being. And he's dehumanizing his daughter. So he's attempting to do one thing, he's achieving another. And I think physical cruelty is much more obvious the way that you're doing it. Verbal cruelty is much trickier, and it's harder to understand the motivations and why it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're pointing out to, the necessary dehumanization that's required, in cruelty, it is a lot more difficult to say something horrible or to do some act of horrendous violence against someone when you understand that fundamentally they are the exact same as you. And so you'll do absolutely anything to convince yourself of the separateness or to convince yourself that they deserve it. And the reality is that no one deserves to go through anything like that. People need to be held accountable when they engage in behaviors that are harmful, but accountability does not look like punishment that's cruel. It implies simply acknowledging what you did and working to do something different in the future and giving people the tools they need to do that. But I just think I'm thinking about like the cruelty of so many systems that exist in our world. I'm thinking about the criminal justice system where people rot in prison for the rest of their lives for things that maybe they did do, but then you expect that that time will change them and reform them and make them better. It's like if somebody is engaging in these horrible behaviors and then you go and you just continue to mistreat them, do you expect that that's going to reform them?
Better? Yeah, no. I think that this brings us to, because I think we're going to talk about systems and different things like that. I want to dive into, to get more into the psychology of it a bit, I want us to talk about times when we've been cruel. Because I think that's we don't want to admit those times. It's easier to talk about things that others did. But I think us talking about those things that we've done, I think that opens up the door because we can talk about, why did I make that decision? Why did I say that thing? Why did I do that thing in that moment? So I'm interested to know, from your perspective, when you were thinking about this, what's something that you look at, even if it was, you said, sometimes you said things and they weren't even intentionally cruel, but what was something that you did that you remember?
When I graduated from college, my family came to see me, and I was going to college in another state. They are from Pennsylvania. I was living in Florida. And while they were there, the day of my graduation was honestly, it was really pretty unpleasant after the ceremony. It was tough. And then the next day was Mother's Day. And we were out for lunch celebrating my mom. And we're at lunch, and she was going on and on about something she likes to talk about as the dietary restrictions she has. And she was telling me how she doesn't eat bread. And I've heard about her not eating bread a lot over the years. And she's like, well, I just don't eat bread. And I remember I said, Mom, I really don't care that you don't eat bread. I was just at my limit. I was like, I don't care. I probably threw in some expletives in public, but I was just I was at my limit at that point. And I just saw her eyes. Oh, she looked so sad. And she just said, you don't care about me? You don't care. And I felt so bad. It was terrible. Because I know when she was little, nobody did care about her. And so it was hurtful. I didn't mean for it to be at all, but I just could see, it was I hit something really deep in her. And I still feel bad, obviously. Because I know that in a lot of ways, my graduation from college was hers. She paid for my school. She helped me a lot, and she put herself through college at night for 8 years. But I got to go to college and kind of live the real college experience. And I was really successful. And I know I did a lot of that on my own, but that was so important to her. And I felt like I kind of...
Maybe took some of that.
I took some of that away. Yeah, I didn't know that was going to make me cry. But it was hard.
I think that's the problem. Something that happens with cruelty is it brings up these, particularly if you actually feel bad about it. Not everybody who is cruel does feel bad about what they've done. And we're going to talk about how that happens in a second. But for me, I have plenty of examples of being cruel, but actually one of the ones that really sticks out in my mind was probably from when I was probably 6 years old. Oh. So I was in this house, and I actually wrote about this in my book, Restorative Beauty, there's this huge tree in our backyard. And so we would whenever my friends would come over, we'd often play around the tree. So what had happened was I had this fishing pole from when I was like little, little thing that you could like fish and like pick up with a magnet. So we had taken, I was with my friend of mine, we had taken the string off the pole, and we were just doing stuff around the tree. And he had tied the rope of the line to a brick, and we were pulling the brick, and we were basically he was like, I want you to hold it on this side, and we were going to do it, and then he was going to come around and tie it. And so I'm sitting there and I'm holding it, and the thought crossed my mind. I was like, if I let go of this will fall on his head. Yeah. This will hurt him. And I did, and I let go of it, now, I mean, thank God it didn't hit on the edge or anything. Like, I wasn't thinking about how it could have killed him, which it could have. And it hit him, and I heard him, like, he immediately started crying, and he ran towards the house. And I remember he was up on the door, and he was knocking on the door to get in. And I remember I ran up to him and I said, nobody's going to help you. Nobody's going to come out to help you. And he just kind of stopped, and he looked at me, and he kind of just reset. And I don't think he realized that I let it go intentionally. Like, he didn't know about that, but I did. And so I think about that moment often only because I was like, why did I want to? There was something clearly in my mind, like if I'm starting to, I don't know why I felt the desire to hurt him, but there was something in me that was like, just let go, and you can hurt him. And oftentimes what would happen, and I realize this now looking back, is that I'm often, even like as we're talking now, I'm thinking about things that are happening at prior times in my life. Yeah. And so when I was sitting there, likely what was happening was I was thinking about some argument we had or some time where he was mean to me. And so in that moment I thought, oh yeah, no, I can get him back. And I think about that as, wow, I did that. Like, I could have killed my friend. Literally. And then I had the gall afterwards to go up and say to him, nobody's going to help you. Like, that's the ultimate in cruelty. And I kind of shudder to think, oh my gosh, that's a part of who I am as a person. I could do that. And there are times where in my life, that incident, I've done that in other instances in my life. I wouldn't say that it's a consistent thing for me where I do it all the time, but it has come up, I'd say a solid 2, 3, 4 times in my life where I've done something like that or said something like that, and I did it knowing it was going to cause and inflict pain on somebody. And I think that that's the hard thing about it is your situation is you were at your wit's end, you said it, and you immediately regretted it. I've done it where I knew what was going to happen. Yeah. And I think that that's hard for me to kind of work through, which is, wow, you have this side of you where you actually, not only do you want to inflict pain sometimes, but you're willing to actually cross that line and do it. And that's scary to me because I'm somebody who cares a lot about making sure other people feel loved and accepted and all of those things. Yes. But to know that that's in me, that's a scary thing, right?
Right. Being a child, it seems like the most stress-free time in your life, but you really are just beholden to whatever someone else wants. And you don't even realize it until you become an adult or you get to those teenage years where you do get a bit more autonomy and you're like, oh my God, this is great. I think about it like I am able to, during a work day, if I need to get up and take a walk, I can do it. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I couldn't do that during school. And so I just imagine for you, your behavior is something that this friend did took away control from me or hurt me. Mm-hmm. I don't have a lot of control, but look what I can do with this setup that I have, with the tools I have here. Mm-hmm. And let me do this to you. That
all
sort
I have
of
to do is let go, and then that's that.
Yeah, and I could even make it an accident or make it appear to be an accident.
And I didn't know if it was going to hit him either. I wasn't sure, but it did. And so, I mean, and so this is an interesting thing. So you're giving me an out. in a way, right? You're kind of rationalizing, saying, well, you're 6 and you don't have control, and there's truth. Like, we can get into the context of all of those things, right? Yeah. But I also knew fundamentally that it could hit him, and in fact, I kind of wanted it to.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the thing is that regardless of my reasons for just going like this, there was something fundamental in my nature that wanted that. And that's scary, because I think that for all of us, it's perhaps there are people who don't have that as part of their nature at all. But I do think that within each of us, there is a little bit of that. There's at least a sprinkle, and sometimes a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody is doing something that's unjust to me, there is part of me that, for me, it's not so much I want to hurt you, but I want you to know that you hurt me, first of all, and I want you to see that you're wrong. And if that means me showing you, I love it. There's some part of me that's like, yes, proving people wrong. It's a great feeling. But I can feel when that happens. And so the moment I feel I've done something wrong or bad, I am immediately hit with like regret, guilt, shame. Like, oh shit, who am I if I did this? Like, it actually like, it shakes part of me. And it's from small things even, like just me being defensive. I have terrible guilt when I respond to someone like...
Yeah, even when it's justified defense, you feel bad about it.
It's true. Have you experienced that from me? No.
Yeah, well, I think that so this is the interesting thing, right? You're right to point out the idea that, okay, you do something where you lash out, and then I think what we would say is a normative response or a hopeful response that we would have is you do feel shame and you do feel guilt and regret, because that's what keeps you from doing those things all the time. If you don't feel shame and guilt and regret,
you're a sociopath.
Then you can do those things without any kind of moral feeling of consequence. And this is the interesting thing. Those 3 feelings are what we associate with morality. I remember in one of my early podcasts, I talked to this psychologist who said, really, morality more than anything else is a matter of anxiety. It's how anxious are you to fit in with a system of thought that you don't want to break away from. And so this is something that, of course, comes from the Milgram experiment. And the Milgram experiment, I think it's a really interesting question of kind of it came out of World War II. Why did the Nazis do what they do? Is it because, and this is the question, did the Germans have some evil gene that made them do this to the degree that they did compared to everybody else? And they were trying to figure that out. And Milgram performed an experiment where, it's a very famous one. Couldn't do it today because there's a lot of ethical things around it. But what he did was he would bring people in and he would have them sit down and he would ask questions, right? So he asked you a question, and then what would happen if you got the question wrong? If the person so you're on the other side, I can't see you.
You're administering the question
to someone. So I'm asking you the question, what's 5 plus 5? And you say 11. Well, now I have to shock you.
Yeah.
And then every time you get a question wrong, I'm increasing the voltage of the shock to the point where actually the last 3 shocks would kill a person. You would be dead. And what he found from that experiment was that 60% of the people in the experiment actually shocked to the death. Now the question was, why? Well, the answer to that was that there was an authority figure in the room, the scientist who's running and conducting the experiment, who said, well, please continue on. Because almost everybody had qualms about, oh my gosh, this person is hurting. Because they would start screaming out and saying, I can't take it anymore, please stop, please stop. And the scientist would say, please continue with the experiment. And oftentimes, because there was this person there who was an authority figure and said, because there's a great example of it where the guy, he says, who's taking responsibility for this? He says, I don't want to be responsible for this man's death. And he says, I take responsibility, you just keep going. He said, okay. And so he keeps going. So here's the thing. What that shows is that so that's a closed system where you have an authority figure who's telling you to do something that he knows it's wrong, but he does it anyway. And so what's scary is that as individuals, we're talking about cruelty on an individual level, are we not?
Yes.
So individually, we sit there and we say we've done these things, and afterwards we feel horrible.
Yes.
And that's individual to us. But then you create a whole system now where the rules shift. And if the rules are, let's take Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainians are bad, and every single person, we're going after them to kill them because they're fascists or whatever the propaganda lie is that they've been told. These people who are fighting, they need to be not only deterred but destroyed, and in fact, they're subhuman. So now you have a whole system of thought that is in place, and there's no guardrails. You as an individual might sit there and feel, oh my gosh, this is wrong to do this to these Ukrainian POWs. But because everybody else around you is doing it, and because the authority figures are encouraging it, and if you don't do it, you seem like the odd person out. Well, now the entire system has shifted, and cruelty is the norm, right, as opposed to an exception. And so that sociopathic behavior that you were talking about, you can very quickly adopt that because you have to. You can shove those regret and remorse and guilt, you can shove all that aside.
Yeah, it is astonishing to me the way that certain reasoning can allow us to move past our best impulses. Like, well, this is okay because somebody in power says it is. Mm-hmm. And I've mentioned this to you just kind of around other things, but a book that really kind of changed my life on this thinking was called Weird John Brown. And it's about this, prior to the Civil War, this man, John Brown, he said, slavery is wrong. People who are sitting here and owning slaves need to be held to account. And so he decided to get up a group of fellow abolitionists to essentially take care of those who held slaves. And so he stormed Harper's Ferry, people were killed, and then he was put in jail. And he ended up being put to death as well. And then like 1 or 2 years later, the Civil War happened, and the same sorts of things were happening. People were being put to death, or there was war that involved tremendous death and bloodshed on both sides, and it was ultimately to ensure that justice was upheld. And essentially, because the government allowed the war to happen, it made it okay. But what John Brown chose to do of his own accord was not. It's interesting what fine line is there that allows people to say, like, this violence is okay, but this violence is not.
Well, I think that's the scary thing about it, is that we as individuals, we often forget about it's hard for us to see the forest from the trees.
Yes.
Within this, because we think, oh, I have my own system of thought, and I have my own morals, I have my own values, and I'm going to live by those.
Yeah.
But what we don't often realize is that you're also part of this much larger system, a much larger organism. And once you put a bunch of humans together, your psychology that you're so sure of as an individual can then essentially be torn from you, and you can start doing things very quickly that you otherwise would not have done, simply because what wasn't okay in your own individual world is now okay and accepted and often expected.
Yes.
In this new version of reality that you've entered into. And how quickly that shift can happen is very, very scary with human beings and our psychology. And so I think the question becomes, because if the whole thing about Kokoro is intentionality,
yes,
living an intentional life. Obviously we can sit there and say, don't be cruel, right? We can say that to everybody, hey, don't be cruel. And I think everybody here would say, yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't be cruel. Yeah, that's a horrible thing. Those are horrible people. But when we're talking about a larger system, we live our lives, and that cruelty exists right parallel to us all the time. And people are being put away, people are being hurt, people are being unfortunately arrested without cause in different instances, and there's plenty of examples of that. But we sit there and we say, okay, well, yeah, cruelty is wrong. We've all agreed on that. But yet we live right next to a system that embraces that and that we are tacitly responsible for because we say, we just keep living our lives. So I think the question becomes, when you're living in a society where there are accepted forms of cruelty, and criminal justice is one of them.
Absolutely. The death penalty.
The death penalty, absolutely. What then becomes your responsibility? Because you might not find yourself in a group of people who are like, yeah, let's go out and murder folks, right? You're probably not going to find that. But you do live in a society right now that accepts that as normative. So what do you think is a way that we can, if we're going to say we don't believe in cruelty, how can we be somebody who lives intentionally towards that end in this world that we occupy right now?
Well, I think the biggest misconception that allows so much cruelty to just infiltrate our world and our society is when we look at someone who's separate from us, the further we move beyond our familial connections, the more disconnection we can perceive. And the more you become kind of the boogeyman that society has chosen for the decade, the more we can say, like, they're over here, I'm over here. They're barely even human compared to what I believe is human. And so I think one of the fundamentals of ensuring that we don't live a life guided by cruelty that we're not even aware of is moving beyond dehumanization, moving toward a life that understands that there is no creature on this earth that is all that different from us, particularly human beings. But I mean, we don't really appreciate even that there are living things around us that we need to be tender and gentle with as well. And so I think that moving away from saying like, that's not my problem. Those people, they're not really my responsibility.
So, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying, and I really appreciate this because I think it's super important, is taking the time to learn about other people's lives. So you and I have been listening to a fantastic podcast. I'd highly recommend it. It's called In the Dark. It's absolutely incredible. And the first season is about a boy who is abducted and ultimately murdered. And one of the aspects of the first season of that podcast is talking about the laws that came about as a result of that case. And you would probably know them more colloquially as Megan's offenders today. And something about that podcast, which is so important, is that the mother of the young boy who died, she took it upon herself to get to know these sexual offenders. Yes. She took it upon herself to learn about their lives, where they came from, what they'd been through, even though one of them was the one responsible for her son's death. She did that and actually ended up becoming an advocate on their behalf because she spent so much time with them. Okay. So this is to your point, which is that I think one of the big things to live intentionally is you have to get to know how other people live intimately. Yeah. Like you have to understand that.
Yeah. Well, and the phrase that I love, and I am a Brene Brown follower for sure, but she has this chapter of her book, Braving the Wilderness, that's called People Are Hard to Hate Up Close, Lean In. And I think the truth is it's a lot easier to decide that a person is separate from you when you know nothing about them. The more we talk to each other, the more we find common ground usually. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that sometimes I have been wrong about my initial beliefs around a person. And I have learned to trust my instincts on certain things that I think or feel, but sometimes I do come to the wrong conclusion about a person, or I can completely villainize a person who doesn't deserve that. And because of the perfectionistic side of me, sometimes I expect people to not make mistakes, which is crazy.
Which is hard being friends with me. I mean, that's right there. That every time we hang out.
I am very full of grace, so I'm very kind. No, but I mean, I think that's the other thing too, is that also, this goes back to things that we've talked about in other episodes too, but finding a deep well of compassion for ourselves, understanding for ourselves. If you're holding yourself to very high, unrealistic standards, often you are extending those out to other people too. And so developing a deep well of compassion for yourself allows you to do the same for others and makes it easier to get to know people who are different from you. It's harder to commit acts of cruelty, or not even cruelty, but just like
indifference sometimes.
Indifference,
I think,
division, when you know every person is a human being connected to you.
Well, and I think that's a fundamental aspect of it is I think that by getting to know people's stories, you're always reminded this person is a person. And they are like me, and they have hopes and dreams and difficulties in life. And by having that and always keeping that in mind, and I think that's something that's so important. You have to keep that at the forefront of your mind all the time, because just think about when you're driving and somebody cuts you off. What's your immediate reaction? Like you want to, like I know for me, I'm like, oh, I want to go after them. But you sit there and you say, oh, that's so rude or whatever. But if you think about it and you just come back into yourself and you say, oh my gosh, this is a human being. Yeah. And like, whatever, they did what they did.
I've cut people off by accident plenty of times. And I've seen this video recently where it was like somebody cut somebody off and they rolled down their window and they're like, that was my bad, I'm so sorry. And I wish that we could all do that sometimes, because it's like, it's amazing how somebody owning that can, not always, but it brings you down. But one thing I wonder if I can note too, connected to this idea of feeling a deep sense of connection to everyone, even the people that we hate most, like the people who seem responsible for the most cruelty, like feeling some glimmer of hope for them or understanding we're connected to them, I think is important. But I think a huge question that everyone asks, and this is important because you and I have both, you've been a helping professional. I know that even though you're not a pastor anymore, you care deeply about people. And I think that something that's in the forefront of people's minds right now is, how do I care for and feel connected to other people without allowing the pain and suffering of the world to consume me?
Yes.
And I do think that that's understanding that we can only be responsible for so much, but still honoring that connection and looking someone in the eye, something as simple as that. It really helps me to feel connected to people. There's somebody who hangs out by where I live, and he's somebody who's on the street with a sign that says homeless, can you help? And I try to help him, but every time I pass him by when I'm driving, I wave at him and I smile, just because so often we're so afraid of like really seeing that person suffering and being just sucked under by the weight of people's pain, because there is a lot of pain in the world. Yeah. And I think that something as small as that can mean the world to a person. I haven't heard that from him. I don't know if it means anything to him, but I just want him to know I see him and that he matters to me. I think about him. I see him all the time and I worry about him. And, you wonder if anyone worries about certain people in our world that are lost and forgotten.
Yeah, and I think that to that end, the other thing that I would say, and I think that's right on, is that if we're talking about larger systems too, so doing that individually is very helpful. I also think though that taking time to actually really be involved in the world matters. So for example, I know I got involved with a good friend of mine who became a judge, and he's been on our show. His name is Sunil Bawe, and he is a remarkable human being. He is very kind. He cares about justice. He wants just outcomes for the people who come into his court, and he wants to uphold the law. If you want to change a system, you have to be an active component of that change.
Right.
You can't just sit back and hope that other people are just going to do it for you. And now, I'm not a judge. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not any of those things. But what I can do is that I know this one guy who's an amazing fellow, and I know that him being in that position of power is going to make sure that other people get a fair shake when they end up in this system that is really not tailored to give justice to everyone equally. Right. So because of that, I feel, okay, I can put my marbles behind this one guy, and I know that that can make a difference. Like you said, if I feel like I have to fix the entire criminal justice system, that's not going to happen. Right. But I can in this one instance. I know that I can back this judge, and when he tells me, hey, there's this other person who's running who's a really good person, would you be willing to help us maybe collect signatures, or would you be willing to help us fundraise or do whatever? Absolutely. Yes. Because I understand, now that I have this one person, whoever he says, I believe that anybody who he's going to support is going to have the same ethics and values and morals. And so what it's important is that you just need to find one person who you trust, who is making that difference. And even if that's not something you personally can do, back that person. Be there with them and say, whatever resources I can give you, because I know that that's going to spread out and help other people.
Yeah. I think not being afraid to go and experience life through someone else's experiences, and not being afraid to fall too deep into the pain and suffering of others. That's it's an interesting piece of how we seek to live a life where we're not inflicting cruelty, is by going and walking with people through their own experiences, maybe even their experiences of suffering. So,
and Lord knows we need that today more than we ever have. So
we really do.
Yeah.
And
well, I hope that this has been an important conversation, a good conversation, and we'll be back next week with another one, another interesting talk. And we thank you for just being there and being a part of our community. Like and comment if there's something that you want to leave, if there's something that happened to you, if there's experience you had, let us know. We'd love to hear about it and talk to you online. Be well.